What's up guys, we're going to be playing with two blasts from the past, and that's of course the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And the cool thing is here that we're going to be pitting these two together, something that no one has ever done before. So yeah, get ready for, wait, hold on a second. These are the wrong one. 1 second. And this is why I wear glasses. Okay, but technically I wasn't lying. Today we're going to be playing with the Sega Genesis Mini and the Super Nintendo Mini. Or the Super Nintendo Classic, whatever the hell they call it. But point is, this is actually kind of a serendipitous moment because we get to finally have a honest-to-God rematch. Yes, back in the day, these were freaking fighting out the console wars, and yes, the Super Nintendo won, although the Genesis won in many other aspects for power and just raw amount of games, memorable games, and nowadays, the Super Nintendo won. But, again, that was then. This is now. So yeah, let's pit these two mini juggernauts together and see, which is the better mini console in today's day and age. So yeah, the criteria are presentation, controller, features, games, and emulation. So yeah, for all you fanboys out there, or people who are just generally curious and want to actually pick one of these up, which one of these mini consoles is considered the best of the best? Well, let's find out. To start things off, let's talk about the actual physical consoles themselves. And since the Super Nintendo did win the original console wars, we're going to go with winner's ball here. The SNES Mini is honestly a beautiful little box. The detail is amazing, and it honestly looks like Wayne Szalinski broke into your house in the middle of the night and shrunk your video game console down to size. Now, for some of you, this is not the typical console. So yeah, hold on, let me do some magic here. There we go. This is the one America's used to, but you know what, screw that, we're going to actually compare the two. Because regardless, whether you grew up with the Super Nintendo in the PAL regions or North America, or hell, even just owned the Super Famicom originally, these are beautifully crafted. They have some good weight to them and even feels like the originals. The plastic feels spot on, the color is the perfect shade of gray, although whether it yellows or not remains to be seen, but most of the little details like the printing and even the vents are identical. It is a near perfect specimen, and I say near perfect because despite it being spot on, the cartridge port is not accessible and the eject button does not do anything. Yes, these are useless I guess, but in a weird way it would have been cool little features to have them. And on top of that, the controller ports are actually uncovered by doing this. Well, moving on, Sega was clearly reading everyone's comments about this, and they went the full 9 yards, and included everything. And I mean everything. Every button is pressable, the volume slider is movable, the cartridge slot is openable, which if you wanted, you could actually put a tiny cart in there. Even the expansion slot on the bottom of the console is removable, allowing for things like this to be put into it. Now again, just like the Super Nintendo Classic, none of this is actually usable. The power and reset buttons are the only two buttons that actually function, but for aesthetic and display purposes, Sega knocked it out of the park here. So, as much as I do prefer the European overall design of the Super Nintendo, the winner here is clearly the Sega Genesis Mini. I mean, the detail, the craftsmanship, everything about this is just so pretty to look at, to the point where even if you didn't want to buy it just to play it, this is a great collectible. And that says a lot of how great this thing is. So yeah, the winner here is easily the Sega Genesis Mini. Next up, speaking of real functioning buttons, let's talk about the most important factor of video games. The buttons, or the controller. And again, winner's ball. The Genesis Mini comes with a standard 3-button controller that initially shipped with the original console back in '89. And I must say, holy crap, this feels uncanny. I mean, here I have an original and the one that it shipped with the console, and they feel almost identical. The shape is perfectly aligned with the original one, the face buttons feel exactly the same, the D-pad feels great. Now, while it does feel a bit more stiff compared to the real controller, that can easily be up to the fact that this has far more use on it. So the fact that it feels at least close is incredible. Almost a perfect reproduction. Now moving on to the Super Nintendo pad. And it's the exact same verdict as before. This feels absolutely stunning, and feels like it was just pulled directly from the assembly line back in 1991. Buttons, triggers, and the D-pad are perfect. So as far as comparing them to the originals go, it's almost a perfect tie, and I can't really decide between the two. So now, let's pit these two controllers against each other. For starters, the cable length. Now, the NES Classic controller had an abysmal cable length at only 30 inches. But thankfully, Nintendo upped the ante with the SNES Classic, and increased the cable size to 4 feet and 6 inches, nearly doubling the length. But to be honest, even that feels a bit short every now and then. So Sega saw this and went a bit further at 6 feet, which may not seem like much more, but trust me, the longer the cord is, the better. But yeah, besides that, the Super Nintendo wins here. Look, I'm not bringing nostalgia in here, but to be honest, the form factor for the SNES controller was perfect out of the gate, and it having 4 more buttons than the 3-button Genesis pad is kind of a no-brainer. Don't believe me? Let's check out Street Fighter 2, which thankfully is included in both minis. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the best at this game, far from it, but my god is it far easier to play without the need to press the start button to change between kicks and punches. Yeah, in order to play this game with a 3-button controller, you need to switch between your kicks and punches with start. Yes, you can remedy this on the Genesis by getting yourself a 6-button controller, which feels incredible and solves the lack of buttons issue. But we're only comparing the controllers that came with the stock mini console. Besides, if we were going to compare the third-party mini console controllers, the SNES already has one hell of a head start. And on that front as well, it just comes down to preference by this point. But yeah, on top of the 3-button controller feeling a bit bulky and the lack of buttons, the Super Nintendo pad has gone down as one of the best controllers ever made, to the point where many of today's controllers' designs owe a lot to the OEM SNES pad. So yeah, Super Nintendo Classic wins this one. Next up, features. Now let's delve into the software included on these babies. Once again, winner's ball. The SNES Mini's UI from the get-go is a treat, sporting a nifty yet simple design along with catchy menu music. It's easy to navigate and very quick and responsive. The mini console also comes with 3 basic options for screen modes, each of which that can be played with your choice of borders. Usually with classic consoles, I like the black bars, but for the SNES, I do actually like this Nintendo style like classic television. But yeah, regardless. All in all, it's greatly implemented and feels good to go from game to game. And while the console does support full save function for any game that originally had it back then, each game comes with 4 dedicated save slots, making it much easier to jump back into any game. Moving on to the Genesis Mini, games are displayed in a grid-like manner, making navigation a bit easier compared to the SNES. Each game is preceded by a short description before each title, which is cool at first, but does waste a couple of seconds each time you want to jump back in. But just mashing the button twice just zips you right past that, so no harm, no foul. Besides that, the menu music is a remix of many game songs found in the Mini, produced by the legendary Yuzo Koshiro, who has composed music for games like the Streets of Rage series. And I have to be honest here, it sounds awesome. On top of that, the Genesis Mini also includes 4 different ways to play the games, in a 4x3 mode, a widescreen mode, both of which that can be used with the CRT filter. Now yes, while some of you may be thinking, widescreen, why the hell would anyone want widescreen? Some people actually do prefer playing the game full screen. Now, yes, while I enjoy playing games 4x3, but for those who don't care, it's great to have at least the option. So, hey, you can't get mad about choice. But for those of you who still want to play in 4x3, there are some background borders. Not as many as the SNES, but just like the Super Nintendo Mini, you can turn these off if you prefer the black border. Also, another similarity is the save states. Each game gets 4 dedicated save slots, making it easy to come back and resume any game. Now, from the get-go, both seem to include their strengths and weaknesses. But now let's discuss the biggest features that decide the winner of this category. Now, in typical fare, each one of these includes the ability to change the language on the console. Now, while this simply just changes the language on the Super Nintendo Mini, on the Genesis, it changes a whole lot more. The backgrounds are switched to represent one of the original 3 regions, along with changing the name on the top, the Sega Genesis for North America, or the Mega Drive for PAL and Japanese regions. But to clinch that, each game now sports the box art of each respected region, as well as the title that it's known as there. As an aesthetic choice, this is incredible, and gives the Genesis Mini some variety. But once again, the Super Nintendo wins here. Yes, I'm not telling the full story about the region changes just yet. I will, but soon. But here, it's not a quality of life feature that improves the overall experience with the console. It's just a cool one that boosts it in a very different way in a very different category. But besides that, the one unique quality of life feature that the Genesis Mini does have over the Super Nintendo is the ability to go back to the menu without having to get up and hit the reset button on the console. Simply by holding down the start button for about 5 seconds, you are brought to a subscreen that allows for save states or returning to the main menu. But as far as time saving goes, one feature that is severely missed on the Genesis Mini is the ability to rewind games. Now again, both include save states, but it is kind of incredible how much time you save with the rewind feature. Instead of having to save each time you hit a hard point in a game and, having the foresight of just going, it's kind of annoying. But yeah, is the rewind feature going to be used by everyone? Of course not. Purists will stand by and say that it's a cheat, and that anyone that uses it must suck at games. Now, while I do understand that logic a bit, I don't agree with it. I understand that as an adult, time is not a luxury anymore, for some at least. Save states are an essential inclusion for these types of mini consoles, because most people are just buying these to either take a trip down nostalgia lane or play these games for the very first time, without having to spend an arm and a leg and waste a lot of time. So with that being said, yes, the Genesis has the features of widescreen, region changing, and the ability to return to the main menu with just the controller. But the Super Nintendo Classic edges it out with the ability of rewinding 5 minutes in any of the RPGs and less than a minute for any of the action games. Is it cheating? Sure. But for the sake of someone who wants to just play the games, this is an essential feature that allows for anyone, and I mean anyone, to enjoy any hard game or immediately just jump back to fix a mistake in any long RPG without having to reload or having the foresight of creating a save state in moments before. And if you still don't buy that, Sega did in fact include this feature along with a fast forwarding feature in their Sega Genesis compilation for the PS4, the Xbox One, and the Switch. So yeah, if they clearly had access to the feature, why was it not included in the Sega Genesis Mini? So yeah, the winner here is the Super Nintendo. Moving on, this is a big one. Let's discuss the games included in each mini. For starters, each one has a lineup of games that can easily be seen as an essential games library to own if you own these back in the 90s. From Sonic the Hedgehog 2 to Road Rash 2 on the Genesis, or Super Mario World to F-Zero on the Super Nintendo. The quality of these lists are top-notch and are must-play games for gaming in general, not just for the respective platforms. In addition, each has incredible variety, which covers many if not all the major genres such as fighting games, platformers, and puzzle games. Sports games are sadly missing from both of these, or at least typical National League style games such as Madden or NHL hockey, well, mostly due to licensing issues. But everything else is well represented here. But despite that, each console even goes as far as to introduce never-before-released games in their libraries, such as a port of Darius on the Genesis and the legendary Star Fox 2. And on top of that, alright, who am I kidding? We already know the winner is here. I mean, it's clear as day, but yes, the quantity and the quality is always important, but the sheer amount of one over the other is kind of hard not to note. But regardless, just bear with me for a second. So, just to get this out of the way, the SNES Classic sports 20 games plus one never-released game, which brings it up to 21, while the Genesis Mini has a whopping 40 games plus 2 never-released games. This is a huge middle finger to Nintendo by doubling the amount verbatim. 20 to 40, and 1 bonus to 2 bonuses. So yeah, but before I crown the clear winner here, I do have to point out something. Despite the Genesis Mini having the clear advantage here, it does have a handful of Y titles. And, well, let's be blunt. Eternal Champions, this doesn't deserve to be here. Alex Kidd, no, stop including this. Virtua Fighter 2, why is this here? And Shining Force 1. And this one is the one I'm the most pissed about because Shining Force 2 is leagues better. I mean, better story, freaking better music, the graphics are freaking great, and on top of that, it doesn't have horrible controller input lag. The original, for some odd reason, just feels broken. And it's not the console, it's not the refresh rate of my TV, it's the freaking game itself. And with this Sega Genesis Mini, doing the whole 1 per series list, I mean, in some cases, they made the right choices elsewhere. Streets of Rage 2, Shinobi 3, and Phantasy Star 4. But with Shining Force, this sucks. And to add even more to the argument for this SNES Classic, yeah, 21 is far less than 42. But every game on the Super Nintendo Classic absolutely deserves to be on here. But once again, let's get real. Thanks to the Genesis Mini's library, each game on the Super Nintendo is pretty much matched, or is outnumbered by many other games. I mean, both include Contra, Mega Man, Castlevania titles, Street Fighter 2, and multiple mascot titles like Sonic, ToeJam and Earl, Donkey Kong Country, and of course, Mario. But yeah, this is honestly not a fair comparison. Oh, and to add insult to injury, that whole thing that I was talking about, the whole region changing stuff, well, that applies here. Because not only does the box art change, but the games are also changed to run just as they did in that region. Which at worst just changes the language of the game, but at best gives the player a nearly different experience with added difficulties, graphic changes, or outright different gameplay aspects. The most notable example of this is Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which if you play this in Japan, is called Puyo Puyo. So if you're going to go strictly by the numbers, 42 times 3 pretty much brings the whole new count to 126 versus 21. Is that an accurate number? Of course not. Some of these games barely even change, but point of the matter is, there's still so much to do. I mean, this thing is just chock full of games, and so many different ways to play said games. Again, I'll stand by it. The Super Nintendo has a solid, and I mean solid library of some of the best games you'll ever play in your life. But just the amount of scale, the quantity, the freaking variety here just brings all of this together as an amazing and great console and really a great bang for your buck type of deal. So yeah, this wins by a landslide. Well, the winner's been decided, hasn't it? I mean, what's more important than the games? So then why do we still have a tie? Well, with these mini consoles, it's not that simple. As you probably already know, these two consoles are far from the only mini consoles on the market. And yet, these are being seen as the best out there. Why? Well, currently besides the NES Mini, we also have the likes of the Neo Geo Mini, a Commodore 64 Mini, and even the PlayStation Classic, a mini version of a console whose popularity easily surpasses the original Genesis and the Super Nintendo. I mean, its sales numbers don't lie. It's literally one of the highest selling consoles ever made. And yet, the PlayStation Mini crashed and burned. And once again, why? Well, it's mainly due to the emulation. Yep, no matter what games you put on these things, if the games don't run well, the fun factor goes right out the window. So yes, the deciding factor between which of these two is the best mini console is how well do the games run. Thankfully, the video and graphic stability is rock solid all around for both minis. Scrolling is smooth and the higher resolution complements each game beautifully. Each game runs at a constant 60 FPS, at least the ones that were designed to, and the colors are impeccable. Now, I can go into the intricacies of scroll shimmering and how horrible the scanline modes are for each one, but to be honest, only die-hard videophiles will care, and once again, this console is mainly marketed towards the crowd who just want to play the games and don't want to pay an arm and a leg for RGB or a $200 upscaler. But if you are die-hard about that, then I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I cannot recommend the gaming channels of Digital Foundry and My Life in Gaming enough, because if you really want to go into the nitty-gritty and the technical aspects of all of this, watch those channels and just subscribe to them because they're freaking awesome to listen to. But yeah, as a whole, each console is stunning in 720p, and each game runs great graphics-wise, and the input lag is negligible, or essentially non-existent if you don't even notice it. Speaking of which, forget I mentioned it. Instead, the clincher here is the audio emulation and overall quality. The Super Nintendo Classic shows some issues here and there, with either some music being slightly different by not having the right amount of bass or treble, to even as something as severe as some sound effects outright being cut off. Not to mention, there is slight lag in the sound. Compared to a real Super Nintendo, the sound delay is about 3 frames, which honestly you won't notice unless you have the ear of a percussionist. Other than that though, the music and sound effects remain unaffected and sound spot on really most of the time, and it goes to show how much effort Nintendo puts into making everything sound right. or at the very least has kept improving their emulation prowess since the Wii's Virtual Console. But moving on to the Genesis Mini, and the sound, this is where it falters here. Music is either missing sound effects altogether or just sounding incorrect due to emulation issues, which is a huge shame since the Genesis is known for its unique sound chip and it's home to some of the best music ever in video games. Exhibit A, Streets of Rage 2. But sadly, while this can be forgiven, or maybe you might prefer these versions of these songs, the biggest problem here is easily the sound delay, which sits at around 11 frames. I mean, in the case of the SNES, if you aren't privy to how the old games used to run, you would never notice. But here, even if you're playing these games for the very first time, the sound delay is far more noticeable, and once you hear it, it can drive you up the frickin' wall after a while. It's just a weird disconnect that thankfully you can get used to thanks to how our brains are wired to deal with such things in our everyday lives. But if you're hyper aware, it can very well drive you insane. Or at worst, making you mess up in games due to the timing seeming delayed. So yeah, emulation-wise, each console displays graphics at a crisp HD resolution. Some graphical tweaks that, while yes, are incorrect, can be seen as good changes due to anti-epilepsy measures, which you honestly can't fault the designers for trying to make these safe for everyone to enjoy. But when it comes to the sound emulation, there is one clear winner. Yes, M2 did a great job here, and they should be commended for it because they gave us some great emulations, so much so to the point where it could actually be comparable to the original consoles or the Mega SG. And yes, this is leagues better than any crappy AtGames clone console. Those all suck. This is great. But having said that, it's still a damn shame that we have this issue still. After all these years, it is still a problem. Getting the beautiful freaking sound effects from the original consoles to emulate in today's day and age. And yeah, with that being said, that means the points go into this. It's 8 frames. It's literally winning by 8 frames. But damn it, those 8 frames are very noticeable. So yes, point goes to the Super Nintendo Classic, which makes the overall winner the Super Nintendo Classic. Well, that's the video. And yeah. Now, while some of you hate me, and some of you probably love the fact that your console won, take this whole video with a grain of salt in the sense that it wasn't necessarily meant to just, do a whole console war like, oh, this one won, hell yeah. No. It was meant to just mainly explore just how great both of these are in their own right. Strengths and weaknesses. They both have them. But they're both phenomenal. Regardless. I mean, they're both officially licensed mini consoles. Both of these have games that are easily worth way more, probably 3 times as more as the actual little mini consoles themselves. So both of these are already bang for your buck deals no matter what you do. But regardless, one of the biggest aspects of these two things is the hacking community. Because yes, while you can add more games to this thing or you can add more games to this thing, that's great and everything. I mean, I'm not advocating for it, but I'm also not disagreeing with it. Point I'm trying to make is, with the issues here, these can be fixed, hopefully. I mean, making the games run a lot better, overclocking the speed, making, Sega CD games, 32X games being able to be played on this thing, or just overall fixing the sound issues would make this easily the freaking creme de la creme, the best one. But out of the box, the SNES wins. And even out of the box, this is a phenomenal console. And hacking community has pretty much made this thing a crowning jewel. So yeah, whether you're going to play these things just for a little bit or just have them on your shelf, these are literal must-haves, and easily the best mini consoles to own, bar none, today. So yeah, I've been singing these things praise all day. What next? Well, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, here's to the future mini consoles, like, you know, the Sega Saturn, hopefully. I mean, I part of me doubts it, but I really want to get my hands on one because that would just be great to, you know, reintroduce a lot of people who missed out on the console a long time ago, or hell, the Dreamcast Mini, or who actually wants a virtual console, or sorry, not a virtual console, a Virtual Boy Mini? Anyone? Yeah, me neither. But yeah, let's just hope that this trend doesn't go on too long because it can overstay its welcome. But right now, in this time frame, I'm having the time of my life because the Genesis and the SNES are freaking A+ in my book. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole video. Well, thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys later.